right, it's me, Mr. Fader, guys, and it's time for us to start a new unit, and our new unit is about the hydrosphere. Now, when we talk about hydrosphere, we're referring to the way that water works on our Earth. Now, here's a simple starter question for our unit. Scale of 1 to 5, how important do you think water is to us and to our planet? Okay, go ahead and think about that for a second. All right, my guess is that you probably said 5. It's incredibly, fantastically, remarkably important, right? But now let me ask you another question. Can you really explain why? With specific detail? All right, my guess is the answer is probably not with specific detail. You know it's important. Maybe you said something like, we need it to live, right? That's a pretty common response that kids would give if they were talking about the importance of water. Well, during the course of this unit, you're going to get way more specific detail about why it is that water is so darn important to us. Make sure you're leaning in and paying attention to that. So let's begin pretty simply with just the fact that water is essential for the survival of living things. You know, and that's probably something you knew coming into this unit, no real surprise. But did you also know that water enables many of the specific functions that happen on our planet too? And I'll give you a very specific detail. One specific detail is that water helps to move chemicals around inside of our bodies. Do you know how? Okay, well, that's something else you'll learn during this unit, right? Chances are you knew that our bodies were made of mostly water, but the fact that we're made mostly of water is actually a pretty essential trait towards moving chemicals around in our body. Pay attention to this unit and see if you can figure out how. Here's something else that I think is really important to know about water. It's one of the most important details in our entire unit, and it's the fact that water is often called the universal solvent. And what that means is many other substances will actually dissolve in water, right? Listen to that word again, solvent. That's something that we talked about in 6th grade. A solvent is a substance that can dissolve other substances. Well, water is called the universal solvent because it dissolves lots of stuff. Well, what's the impact of being such a good dissolver? Well, it's hard to find real pure water on Earth. You know, it's because it will dissolve so many other things. Oftentimes we find stuff in our water. Water's not as pure as we think it might be. Okay? Even when it comes from those underground aquifers that they talk about in the bottled water commercials. Okay, so we'll talk a lot about the fact that water can dissolve so many things and the impact that it has on the way that we find water on the surface of our Earth. That's something else you'll learn about during this unit. Now, I think this slide could be the most interesting slide in this section of our notes, and it talks about how water is distributed around our Earth. Odds are that most of you guys knew that most of the surface of the Earth is covered by water. Right? Like, that's not a surprise to you. There are these huge oceans that comprise the majority of the Earth, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that the majority of the surface is covered by water. In fact, if you want the specific detail, it's about 71% of our Earth's surface is covered by water. What's especially interesting to me, though, is right there in the center of the slide, guys. 97% of that water is not drinkable. Isn't that crazy? Now, you probably knew that the majority of water on Earth was not drinkable because it's salt water. It's found in our seas. But did you realize that it was 97%? By the way, think about what that means, guys. It means that only 3% of the water on the Earth is actually fresh water. So water that you and I can drink. 3%! It's incredibly important for life, and yet only 3% of it is drinkable. We ought to be willing to think about that. However, are you ready for some lunacy? Of that 3% that's drinkable, 77% of that drinkable fresh water is actually frozen. It's in our ice caps. It's in our glaciers. How crazy is that, right? Like, very little of the water on Earth is fresh water to begin with, and the majority of our fresh water is frozen. Can you see a potential concern with that? Like, why should that be something that piques our interest or makes us wonder? Well, right, drinking water matters, like it's how we stay alive, and there ain't a lot of it. So I certainly hope we'll take care of the drinking water that we have. Check this one out. Are you ready? Of all of the fresh water that is not frozen, only 1/2 of 1% of it is available for living organisms to use at any given time. So that's even worse news, right? Like, the majority of the fresh water that isn't frozen on Earth, and remember, most fresh water is frozen, but the majority of the fresh water that is not frozen is actually trapped underneath the ground in these things that are called aquifers. We'll study them during the course of our unit. So surface water, water that we can access to drink, is 1/2 of 1% of all of the water on the Earth. Hoy, we better take care of it, right? Like, if we know that it's important to life, and you knew that coming into this unit, if we know that it's important to life and only 1/2 of 1% of it is available to us at any time, that 1/2 of 1% really, really matters to us. The final crazy detail, and you knew this, access to fresh water is determined by your geography. Some places on Earth have access to more fresh water than other places do. And that could cause conflict in the future, right? Like, if you live in a place that doesn't have access to clean fresh water that's available for drinking, and other people do, you might be interested in invading those places, right? So what I hope this slide shows you is how important fresh water is to us. It's not a resource that we have available to us in unlimited amounts, even though the majority of the surface of the Earth is covered by water. Okay, it's really cool, right? So let's pay attention to what we're doing in this unit. Let's pay attention to what we're doing to protect the access to fresh water that we really have. All right, I'm going to end this video.